Good afternoon, good morning. I am Laura Cotton. I wanted to thank everyone for joining us. We're going to be talking about mastering the demo narrative, specifically for pre-sales with our two pre-sales masters who are joining us right now. Um, Specifically, Matthew Preven, Associate Director of Solutions Consulting at Movable Ink, and our own Jason Pierce, Principal Solutions Engineer here at Saleo. Before we dive in, just two quick reminders. There'll be time for Q&A at the end. You can submit those questions at any point during the session through the Q&A window. Please do. Also, this will be recorded and made available to everyone after the session. And with that, I'm going to invite Matt and Jason to both introduce themselves and maybe share a fun fact. Matt, can you kick us off?
Yeah. So, hey, everybody. My name is Matt Preven. As Laura mentioned, I'm an associate director of solutions consulting at Movable Ink, and I've been in the pre-sales world for nearly a decade, working in the ad tech spaces. So, you think about Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, programmatic display, ad serving, as well as the MarTech space. So, thinking about email marketing, rich push, mobile marketing, you name it. And one of the things I love so much about pre-sales is that left brain, right brain challenge that I think we all experience, right? How do we talk about technical feasibility while creating a wonderful story? So I'm excited to share what I've learned over the years, and of course, passing it on to my friend Jason for his intro, but also learn a little bit from him as well. So Jason, I'll kick off to you.
Thank you, Matt. I am Jason Pierce. I am the principal sales engineer at Saleo. And I guess the fun fact about me is I love selling Saleo. It's selling to people who are doing demos, demoing to people who do demos every day. It's a bit meta, but it's a fantastic opportunity. And it's been a game changer for me personally. I've been in the SaaS industry for about, I don't know, 15 years now, and spent some time doing implementations and then shifted to the sales engineering role. And I got some folks I see in the audience from SalesLoft, spent some time there as well. So excited to dive in and talk through some of the challenges that we all face day to day and learn from each other.
Actually made me realize I forgot my fun fact. I was an extra on the last episode of The Sopranos. So I also love demoing to people who love demoing, but that's my little fun fact to have for you all.
That's pretty cool. I don't think we're going to top that today. But we are going to go ahead and jump in. And so what we're going to start with is some of the more common demo problems and pitfalls. So Matt, do you mind starting us off here with some of the common pitfalls you see?
Yeah, of course. And I think the number one kind of pitfall that comes to my mind is being feature led versus kind of telling a story, right? Because, inherently, what are our jobs? It's to explain what our platform does, or at least that's what we think, right? But the reality is that we have to explain how we have a solution for our prospects and for our customers. And so it becomes really difficult as a solutions consultant, sales engineer, solutions engineer the nomenclature may vary on that one, but it becomes really difficult to get out of that mindset of telling you what the feature is versus saying how can this specifically help you? So that's something that has taken me, honestly, years to kind of get out of that. But I would say that's the most common one I see.
Yeah, I can certainly relate to that. And shifting from the harbor tour, the feature showcase, basically, I think it's where we all start. And especially, as a company and a product is getting up and running the first couple of years, you kind of default to that flow before you really have established a mature and developed demo story. I would add to that to say that even when you have a good narrative, being able to put that in terms that is going to resonate with your audience and, using their language, their terminology, and presenting not just, your own narrative about how your software can be used and the value you can get from it, but doing that in a way that's going to really hit home for the audience and help them understand how that will be able to change things for them going forward. It's an ongoing challenge because every audience is different, and learning enough to be able to do that effectively in the oftentimes compressed time frame we have prior to a demo can be a challenge. And so I find that I do a lot of discovery during a call, and I'll ask questions when I realize I don't know enough about this specific topic. Let's do some quick discovery even during the demo so you can start putting that into terminology that'll really resonate with that audience.
Yeah, that's great. So another question for you, Jason, if you wouldn't mind starting us off. What would you say is an area of opportunity for your AEs to kind of step in to help improve or kind of build that maybe space for doing that further discovery during those calls?
I mean, there are so many possibilities to this question. I mean, I'll speak from my own personal experience, but part of it is just learning what that dynamic is like with each AE that you support. If you have a small group of AEs, that is easier to do. I know in some situations you're supporting an entire team or nearly, so you don't have as well developed dynamics with all of those individuals. So just figuring out how to team up and tell that story in an effective way. But more specifically, it's figuring out where the AE can play a role as you're giving the demo. Um, Obviously, you're the quarterback of that conversation in most cases, but the AE can still offer a lot of value, whether it is, active by interjecting into the conversation and hopefully helping to put things into terms that will get that audience's attention, but also things as general as like just reading the room. If I'm sharing my screen, I'm running a demo, I can't really watch if they have webcams on, body language and nonverbal communication cues. But that is key to making sure that you're not just telling a story to a bunch of blank faces who couldn't care less. I think we've all been there at times.
Yeah.
Curious, Matt, your thoughts on that?
No, I couldn't agree more, right? I sometimes in my career I've been with AEs who basically said, here's my 2 minute intro, and now you have 58 minutes to carry the torch, right? So that interactivity, it helps because you need fresh voices in the room, right? So of course, you as a solutions consultant are a subject matter expert, but it also helps for them to read the body language, whether it be in person or virtual, to kind of say, oh, hey, I'd like you to lean in, or this AE is identifying the champion, calling out that person if we maybe missed the mark there. So I think that balancing act is important. And I think another thing as well is really kind of diving in on that pre-prep session. For me, no matter what I do, even if the time is limited, it could be a 15-minute scrum or a 30-minute prep session. I always make sure to have that and have our AEs be able to answer a few questions. Like number one, what is the history of the account? Number two, what are the pain points that our customers are looking to solve for? And number three, what are the primary KPIs and measurements of success? And if you're able to start on that ground, then you can do research into the company, into the industry, because of course that'll be vary for so many folks on the line here. But I think that initial prep, it's sometimes taken for granted, and I think it's just a big mistake not to have it. So one common pitfall is if the AE wants to skip it, I would say for everyone on the line, insist that you keep it because that research, that initial kind of information can only be helpful as you're running through the demo itself.
Yeah, no, that sounds right. And I think we can all relate to the concept of being a demo monkey. And you get on the call and the AE, whether or not you've been given much to go on, it just becomes all right, take it away. And best case scenario, you've got a good story prepared and you've done that prep work with your AE partner. Um, but there are times where that's not the case, and the only option is to go through a fairly generic sort of feature showcase that I think we all know how to do and we all try and avoid. But being able to get that insight from the AE who hopefully has spent more time with that prospect before you have, so that you can not just figure out what that story is, what the value propositions are that you want to focus on, but figuring out that dynamic, the back and forth with the AE, because they are a key part of the presentation, or they hopefully can be a key part of that presentation. And some of that onus is on us to make sure that we're holding them accountable and that we don't feel like we're just thrown in the spotlight and, someone says, dance, monkey, dance, and we have to do it. So, yeah, some of this is probably a little bit personal to my experience. If any of my AEs are listening in, nothing offensive or personal intended here. But even having done this now for close to a decade, I think there is always room to improve on that dynamic, the preparation, and just how you follow through on it. And frankly, I'm excited to get feedback from the audience and kind of hear how all you handle these challenges, because I suspect they're pretty universal for most of us.
Yeah, I completely agree. And to turn that question on its head, to flip it, the best AEs are participating so much. They're asking those open-ended questions. And quite frankly, sometimes they're also deviating from the path of the demo to get to the place we need to be, right? Like some of my best ones will kind of read the room and say, hey, I'm not sure if this is working. And you can use kind of subtle tips and tricks, especially when you're on Zoom, like, the mute, unmute, or even using the Zoom chat to say, hey, you should move forward to this section. Sometimes deviating from the plan, I know that was on the quiz, sometimes that's a good thing, especially to get to the result that we want. So I say the best AEs are able to do that, manage that relationship with us, and manage kind of the tempo and the flow. And then, of course, get those open-ended questions at the end. Because at the end of the day, too, if we run a demo to minute 59 and there's no response, we don't necessarily know how that resonated. So being a quarterback of time as well is absolutely key and something that my best AEs do.
Great.
Awesome. Thank you. Kind of getting deeper into how you guys plan and prepare for these demos and, coordinating with your AEs. Let's jump into more of like the storytelling framework. Matt, how do you typically prepare to tell your story for a demo?
Yeah, it's a great question. So what I actually watched a seminar, and this is from Matthew Lune at Pixar, who kind of talked about the art of storytelling and kind of talked about really the emotional highs and lows and bringing customers on a journey. Because for everyone on the line, we have probably amazing technology to deliver to, but at the end of the day, we have to go back to the pain points, right? So addressing the low and go into the cortisol of the high to kind of ultimately say, present the problem and identify the solution. So I'm always trying to think of that mindset. It's why one of those preliminary questions is what is a key pain point to specifically kind of address in? And that involves a lot of research, right? So I mentioned before, but kind of our 15-minute or 30-minute scrums, those are absolutely important to get into the idea of who that customer is. And then to even going further to what Jason said, using their language, right? We may have demos to beauty retailers who call their customer she, like she is making a purchase or she wants to make a purchase. So adapting that kind of language, even those small little cues go a really, really long way in telling that story. And so ultimately it's about that emotional roller coaster, taking them on a journey. And then the last thing I'll say before passing to Jason too, is identifying who the main character of the story is, because it's not Jason, it's not me, it's not our AE, it's the person who we're demoing to. So understanding their motivations, understanding their pain, taking them through why our solution is the best, that is the key thing. But Jason, I'm so curious to hear what you would say for that question.
This is actually fresh in my mind from a call I had yesterday, as a matter of fact. I think we can get a little bit tunnel vision on the solution. I mean, that's what our job is. It's proposing solutions. And I know there have been times where I've just been so eager, I cut out that first part of the story, the pain. The AE might present a slide that says, here's what we've talked about so far. These are the pain points you surface to us. And so there's a tendency in some cases to just jump right into, and here's how we can help you solve those problems. But I presented a really quick demo yesterday, and I didn't give him a good before view of exactly, what the problem is. And I got called out for it, and it was totally valid. Um, you know, Painting the picture of the story starts with here's where we are today, and here's why we're having this conversation. You obviously acknowledge that you need to find a better way to do this. So I can't just show you what the answer is. I have to help you figure out that entire experience, that journey, end to end. Um, and I think it's also important to make sure that, as Matt said, you're using the language, the terminology, the context that the customer is going to recognize or the prospect's going to recognize, and that you're factoring that into the story overall, like from the start. You're not just, pulling in keywords that you heard them use, but you're kind of baking that into the overall demo story so that you're proposing, the challenge, you're offering the solutions that reference, different people at their organization. Bring in your product team to talk about how this prospect needs these very specific functions. And if you can incorporate more of your audience into that talk track, if you can name drop people that will help, get their attention, it is a good way to at least increase the odds they're not going to just tune out and be doing something else during that demo. We've all been there.
Totally. I
I
also
see.
want to add, you mentioned name drop. That is like my number one tip, like for any new solutions consultant or sales engineer, is like you may have the good fortune of having companies work with a lot of different brands. People want to be a part of the things they admire. And so if you're able to name drop those stories, those case studies, things of that nature to like really reinforce that story, it can be helpful. Again, whether it's a beauty retailer or maybe it's a cruise line, right? To know that there are other people in their shoes and they took that journey with your technology to get there, that just provides a lot of resonance and even kind of internal name dropping as well. Like if I'm throwing a question about something crazy about InfoSec that I have no idea about, I will name drop my InfoSec team and say, hey, we can get you an answer, but the good news is that we have a team to support that, or even a strategy team, a client experience team, an implementations team, whatever your version of that is a big part of the story. Because you think about the main character, they're on their journey. It's not a solo journey. They're going on it with us. And to let them know that there's a whole team kind of wrapped up for them is a really great and comforting experience. And one last thing I'll say too is, for all of us who are demoing SaaS, demoing the technology, even if our technology is the most simple and easiest thing to learn in the world, it's also important to have empathy and understand that learning a new technology is not easy. So when you're in that demo and you're showing the functionality or you're moving incredibly quickly, take a second and take a beat to say, how does this resonate with you? And don't make it a yes, no question. And maybe we'll get into that later in different type of questions. But if you ask that question too, it opens them up to say, hey, I'm not really vibing, or the inverse, which is I'm loving what you're dealing with. And again, it could be the easiest technology in the world, but because it's new, it'll still take a bit to kind of process that.
Yeah. And I'm going to do a thing that SCs often do. I'm going to go rogue for a quick second. David McGeary, I see the question that you put in there about how you change your approach if you're speaking to someone who's not the buyer, but an end user. And knowing your audience, I mean, first and foremost, is key. And hopefully, going into the conversation, you at least have a pretty good idea who you're going to be talking to. But it's not uncommon at all where we think we're talking to one or two folks and they bring in their entire team. And so you've got a group of end users that you really hadn't been expecting to address. But it's obviously key to do it at that opportunity because they're going to be, in most cases, very influential in the deal as well. So I think, first of all, identifying who it is you're speaking to. Somebody's going to be using it. That's a great start, but in what capacity? Are they the admin who will help, the end users leverage the technology? Are they someone that's in the trenches that will be logging in every morning and operating as the end user? And then once you know that, like it's safe to ask questions. I would say, great, would love to know more about your day to day. Like, where do you find inefficiencies with your current process? So that you can start figuring out how to, pivot parts of the conversation to address those. And I think it's totally fair. If you really got surprised, you didn't know who was going to be there, like call it out. Hey, I want to make sure that we can make this relevant to the entire group. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions, in the moment discovery that gives you the chance to tailor the rest of that conversation, because being able to improvise is absolutely critical. And I think it's a skill that develops over time, but you have to be open to it. And don't just get set in your ways. And I've got my plan. Here's my demo narrative. Nothing that you do is going to pull me away from that. That is a great way to lose the audience. So being in the moment. And I wish I could see the audience in this conversation to see where people are nodding, where this is actually hitting home, because it's a really, really key piece of the overall experience, in my experience.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, right? And I guess the spoiler for anybody who is new to the industry, this will happen to you. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, but that's okay. And because of those new folks coming on in, it's also a new opportunity for discovery as well. So you can start off maybe your meeting with intros and maybe ask them why they're here or ask them what they're looking to see. And I think the concept of change management is so critical to and understanding, who is a part of a decision depending on the technology you're selling. So for us at Movable Ink, one of our biggest new ventures with AI is actually impacting design teams, marketing teams, operations teams, technology teams. So understanding their motivations and understanding what is important to them is key. And you can ask that initially and then continue to follow up as well. Again, that's going to change too. And I think it's a difficult balancing act to maintain, but there's nothing wrong with asking questions. And furthermore, that just gives our sales teams more ammunition for them to build a business case. So I would say definitely welcome it. Don't panic when that happens. But you never know. Maybe the CEO comes on board and it makes a decision that much quicker. So definitely welcome the challenge.
And it would be hypocritical of me not to acknowledge the fact that David sent in an update and I didn't read the question properly the first time around. So the question is, what if the person you're speaking to, the buyer, is not going to be a user? Which totally valid point. Thank you for clarifying, David. It's in my experience, it's important to know what sort of perspective that buyer has on the day-to-day operations. I think I've been in so many conversations where we talk to the decision makers, we talk to the influencers who can help us move the deal forward, but they don't have that hands-on experience. And so they're just telling us, here are the pain points that I've gathered from what I hear from the managers, and that's on what they've heard from the users. So it's a game of telephone. And hopefully you've got a pretty good idea from that. But then I think what happens oftentimes is that when you do get to the next conversation with those users and you're prepared to talk about these pain points that the executive shared with you, and it turns out, you know what, that's not what they're struggling with in the trenches. Maybe there is a gap between the front, the end users and the people who are making those decisions. So trying to draw those two sides together is it's hard. I mean, there's no question about it. So I think again, knowing who you're talking to and knowing what their relationship is to the actual day-to-day, use that we're trying to help them understand is important. But it really just becomes more discovery, at least in my experience. Ask questions. While we are here to present the value that we can provide, we can't do that without really understanding where they're coming from. So I think a lot of what I'm going to say here is comes back to having an actual conversation, a dialogue during the demo, not just up here presenting and showing you what we can do. But I'd be curious, Matt, if you have any perspective on that.
I do, yeah. And I want my A's to kind of, if you're on the line, just cover your ears for just a moment on this one. I think what you can also do is invite future meetings, a part two, a part three for specific teams as well. Because sometimes if you have a lot of different people from a lot of different disciplines, if you kind of orient towards maybe the most technical aspects, you might lose some of the creative folks, right? Or vice versa. So I think it's important to kind of navigate that depending on your product, of course, but also invite the opportunity to say, hey, you came on board and that's wonderful. We can go through the technical aspects in a future scoping meeting or something to that effect. I don't want you to be afraid of that. And our A's and our chambers should not be afraid of that either, because it's a really great thing when you have more people in the room. That means that your customer or your prospect, excuse me, is invested and potentially wants to learn more about your product. But we also have to earn that time. So if we're not able to, fully deliver on the technical scoping or creative design or any of those components, I think it's more than okay to say, we're going to cover this off pretty broadly. We're going to cover off a lot of the details that you want to know. And then, as Jason mentioned, continue a discovery to see what pain points those are. And if for some reason it maybe it deviates way too off the plan, maybe we were going way too technical, offer up that off ramp, if you will, that opportunity to have another call as well. It may, again, add more time, more scheduling, but at the end of the day, those are the things that will allow you to win more enterprise deals, is specifically addressing those needs of each team. Because what you don't want to do is look in the rear view mirror and say, we squandered that opportunity because we didn't exactly address that pain. So don't be afraid to do that either.
Awesome.
Actually, you know what,
Oh,
Dorson, I see you out there. I'm glad you were able to join us today. Since what you asked is very much on the topic of being prepared for the demo and how to shift in the moment. An experience where I had a different audience than I was expecting, and you have to shift in the moment. The first thing I'll say is identify that before it's too late, because I have had the worst case scenario. They didn't speak up, and we just went through a demo that we had prepared for a different group of people, and we got through the end of a half hour presentation because they weren't really engaged, and it turns out, you know what, that's not really what we're trying to solve for. So they start asking different questions that you don't have answers for. So if you see people and you don't know who they are on the call, identify who they are and what they care about. That's the first thing I'd say. Um, but then again, as I said before, go back, discovery, figure out what it is. If you understand enough about that end user use case, hopefully it's something you can speak to. But I would say, as Matt just brought up, if you need to go back and do some discovery and follow up with a more refined, targeted conversation, it's worth it. Don't waste your time and their time by trying to, wrangle your conversation into a different talk track. Acknowledge it. Like, hey, you know what? We were prepared for a different conversation. Happy to answer questions right now, but I'd like the chance to actually prepare for this discussion, ask some questions, and schedule some more time. I mean, that's my approach. If my AE will allow it, I think it's the safest bet in many cases.
And I'll just add too, asking open-ended questions throughout the demo, the technical conversation is so critical. I have tried again for years, and I'm better every day and not perfect, but of abandoning yes, no questions. That dreaded "does this make sense" question. It's really easy for someone like in Jason's situation where maybe you don't have the right contact, but they kind of understand what you're getting. Yes, they understand, but are we actually getting to their problem? So one of like the tricks I have in my head is if does this make sense comes in my head, I actually say, tell me how this makes you feel. Or can you envision or tell me how you would envision this in your program. Basically, those open-ended questions allow our customers and our prospects to basically tell us if they understand yes, no, by virtue of what they're going to say next. And the other thing also offer as well in those moments too, is allowing for a moment of pause. This is also an incredibly difficult thing to do. I am a person who like I need to fill the silence, but it took me a while to really kind of think about the other perspective of the person who's listening to the demo. It might just be something where you're introducing a complex topic and they just need to kind of think about it or think about how it works in their workflow as well. So when you're asking that open-ended question for that new person who's come on board, it's a really great way to check off, do they understand this? Yes, no. And from there, quite frankly, are we asking even the right questions or showing the right content too? And again, this will be a theme because, it's funny with storytelling, right? In theory, it's like, oh, the novelist, he's writing his book, he's planning it for years. But for us, it's very different. Sometimes we need to just like throw that away and pivot to the next thing. So those open-ended questions are your helpful navigation and guideline to do just that. And even for you to offer that as well, to say, hey, you know what? I'm showing data and our technical implementation, but would it be helpful if I showed you analytics? That's like a little great thing that can get you to that next step, or at least get for that customer you don't know about what exactly their challenges are.
Ryan, I see your question out there. I'm going to stop going rogue though. Laura, should we go to the next item on the agenda? We can come back to this, Ryan, I promise.
No, you're good. You're good. I think we've already answered a couple of the questions that we have here. I think the next one I'm going to jump us to is what specific storytelling elements do you make a point to regularly incorporate in your demos? And Jason, I'm going to kick that to you first.
Storytelling elements. Oh, that's a good one. It's one that I did not have prepared. I did not prepare for this one. So it's a good example of how on the fly you have to buy some time and figure out what is the appropriate response to the question. So
Well,
I would
I can help on that one if it does help.
that
But I think
please
that,
do.
yeah, so I think, so much of what we do and what we're trained for is to prepare for the middle of a story, right? To prepare for what we're actually selling or what conversation we're having. But again, the importance of the intro and the conclusion are massively important, right? Introduction, just to kind of state it, is establishing credibility. I mean, Jason and I were doing that hopefully well, but as pre-sales experts in this conversation here, if we did not have that, we'd just be two Joe Schmoes talking about pre-sales, and maybe you wouldn't know that we have a decade plus experience together, right? So I think it's that introduction, establishing credibility. It's really important. It's a great storytelling element. Again, think about the main character. Who's your supporting cast? Who is the Samwise to your Frodo, right? We're Sam. So what does Sam bring to the table? And of course, we're going to avoid being Gollum in this situation too. But then thinking about the conclusion, the other element as well. I mentioned this before, but again, I can't tell you how many times we've been at minute 58 at the hour mark and just not gotten the actual answers we need. And I'll quote one of our sales directors at Movable Ink, Nick DeFeo. He always talks about how the elevator conversation becomes really important when you're in an in-person meeting, as in like the demo went great, but tell me the real deal. So it really kind of emphasizes the importance of giving that open time for feedback. So don't finish at minute 58, maybe finish at 52 or whatever it might be. But I think what's really important about that is that allows us to say, all right, did we get to the next chapter in this story? Like what actually resonated? Or is this book done and not going to be published? I promise I'm going to run out of like publishing analogies for this one. But I think just, in terms of storytelling elements, sometimes it's really lost how important that intro and that conclusion is and to make space for it. But Jason, I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, no, you bought me some time. Thank you. That was great. I would say, tacking on to what you said, hopefully you do a great job at explaining the current state, the pain point, the why we're having this conversation as you intro, the entire presentation. Combination of you and the AE setting that here's what we're trying to solve for. And that's great. You got to do that well. but don't forget to resolve that tension at the end. Like you can tell that story and talk about all the great things that you'll be able to do, but what is the result of that? Like you're closing more deals, you're, doing things faster, you're getting better collaboration. So bring it home, close the circle, I guess. I think we often wind up short on time, and the AE hops in, starts trying to schedule the next meeting, talk about next steps. But your narrative needs to have a plot and a resolution. So don't overlook that. And we'd like to think that the story we tell is clear enough. The audience can infer and can understand where it's going, and that the technology I'm providing is the answer to these problems, but spell it out for them. Because in some cases, either they lack imagination or they're not paying close enough attention. And so I need to help you understand how you're going to sell this internally to your bosses. Because unless you are the absolute end decision maker, you probably have to do part of that for us. I mean, hopefully you can get that decision maker onto a call and you can do some of that selling too, but equip your champion, hopefully, with what they need to keep that moving forward internally. And I think on that topic, understand what that is. Don't be afraid to ask. Like, hey, who is going to be involved in deciding this, and what will they need to see? If we can schedule time with them, what would they benefit from seeing? What are the values that we've talked about that you think will resonate a level up, that we can make this easier for you? I think in many of my conversations, it's clear the person I'm talking to who is, doing this and struggling with these challenges every day, they understand, yes, your technology is the answer. I want it, but it's not cheap. And I have to go convince people with budget to unlock that budget for me. And so I need to be on their side and their ally in that effort, because it's in everyone's best interest to do it. Yeah.
Completely agreed. You have to introduce the stakes in those conversations. And
Yeah.
we weren't going to show this video clip because the movie has too much cursing, but a scene I always think about from The Wolf of Wall Street, and if you're in the chat, let me know if you're familiar with this, is "Sell me this pen," right? And I love it so much because what happens is Leo, John Bernthal, the whole group, they're in a restaurant, and basically, they're kind of talking about the art of selling and what kind of goes into it. And basically, Leo says to John Berthal's character, "Okay, I need you to sell me this pen." What John Berthal does is he says, "Hey, do me a favor, write your name on a napkin." And Leo says, "Well, I don't have a pen." And John Berthal says, "Supply and demand," and more curse words. But I think what was really important about this was that he introduced stakes. He basically said, "You have a problem. You need to write your name on this napkin. And what utensil do you have? You don't have one, and I have that for you. And that's the problem I'm introducing." And he doesn't talk about, how amazing the ink is, how it's the best ink in the world, how 20,000 other customers have used this ink, how this pen has like 3 different colors, or it's acrylic or anything like that. He talks about the problem, he talks about the pain. And I'll actually quote another sales manager on our team as well, because whenever he thinks about any enterprise sales, this is Jack Madsen, he talks about really 3 problems. Why change, why now, and why your company, and in my respect, Movable Ink. And if we don't have the answers to those questions, which goes back to what Jason said, which is really identifying the pain and why they're there, they could hear about the greatest features in the world, but then all of a sudden the price point is way too big. Whereas if we identify the problem and have an answer to those questions, then we're able to say, great, this is how we actually fit into the solution.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not sure I have much to add to that. That was great.
I was gonna do my best John Bernthal, Leah, like New York accent. I decided to ditch it last second.
That's too bad.
It's a great clip. Just, touch of cursing. So I think we've spoken really well to building an effective demo. I guess the next question is, what typically comes after the demo for you? Matt, do you want to take this one first?
Yeah, I think it's also the post scrum as well. And again, not all of us have the time for that. For me, currently, working with anywhere from 3 to 8 AEs at once, it can be difficult, but it's important to make that time because number one, the information is fresh in your head, especially to get those next steps on board. But number two, it really comes back to change management. It comes down to, do we address our economic buyer's concerns? Did we address a VP's concerns? Did we address the person who set up the call? I think it's so important to have that post scrum because it's not only important for us to learn like what worked and what didn't, but effectively how do we carry this deal through to the next page. And I've seen deals kind of lost in that cycle when you don't have those things. So after the call, I would say that is massively important. Other things as well. You don't have to, it depends on bandwidth, but I love recording like a demo video, like anything from 3 to 5 minutes of a high level recap of what you saw. That personalized touch makes you stand out so much. And, I will say, we were actually kind of chatting about kind of this concept of, reviewing our own videos and collateral. That's kind of a tricky thing when you're kind of seeing a video of yourself. You're like, oh, it's kind of weird. But what you kind of end up kind of going through that after a few recordings, but ultimately it's just kind of a showing grace of for your prospect to say, not only are we thinking about you, but we're thinking about those extra little steps to go over the top. But Jason, I rambled on a little bit on that one. What do you think about that question?
It's an interesting situation to be in where it doesn't always happen, but in many cases, following the demo, while the same call is still wrapping up, my AE will ask, did that land? What are your thoughts? Was there a wow moment there for you? And it can be awkward, but it's also really valuable. You can get a sense for if there are pieces, like key pieces that you didn't address that they're going to need to, justify moving this forward. So if you can get that immediate feedback, that can be really valuable because it can help you identify what is left to be done, what other arguments do you need to make, which to Matt's point, if you follow up with a condensed version of that demo, which we use Loom, and I will often send a 3-minute, concise version of what I just showed so they can publicize that internally. And getting that immediate feedback helps me understand what to show. Because that first presentation of the demo, hopefully it was all on point and the whole thing resonates, but there are going to be areas that just aren't going to be as important. And so double down on what they have told you really communicates the value. Don't let them forget that part. And whenever possible, get that detail in front of more people at the organization if it truly is a pain point that they need to solve. So the follow up is key, and it should definitely be in conjunction with the AE. In most cases, I assume there are going to be more conversations. We almost always have at least a second demo, if not more. So, evolving what you're showing and evolving the pitch, the value that you're offering. You can't show the same demo 3 times because people are going to tune it out. So, yeah, be open to that feedback. Acknowledge, hey, you know what? This part, I didn't explain that very well. I think they missed some of these, key insights that we can offer. And hopefully you can follow up with the video that emphasizes those or another conversation. But don't just, say, all right, demo done. I'm good. On to the next one. There's a lot to learn, and there's a lot to hopefully, leverage to continue that conversation. And it needs to be very much in coordination with the AE, the overall project plan, and hopefully you've got kind of a roadmap to the deal at the outset, so you have an idea of what is next. But explain that, discuss that, call that out to your prospect so that you know how it's going to follow up, and they can't just ghost you and the deal is done forever. Yeah.
Completely agreed. Yeah, and that's where again that elevator chat comes in. What do we miss? What, right? That's actually one of my favorite questions I heard an executive of my company say is basically what would stop you from making a deal? And maybe because I'm not a chief revenue officer, maybe I don't get to ask that question, but I think it's a really important one because then that's what the follow-up materials are for. Okay, what supplying documents might you need? Or, how do we kind of get to that next level? And I think something to be cognizant too is that in this crazy world we live in with SaaS, and especially in the marketing world, there's like 14,000 different vendors who are trying to vie for your customers or your prospects' attention. So it's those little things that go a really long way. So don't skip on the little details there.
And to expand on that, great point I hadn't even considered. If you know it's a competitive deal and the folks you're talking to are evaluating your competitors, again, can be somewhat awkward, but so many times our AEs have said, so how does that stack up to what you've seen? Where do we stand in your overall evaluation, which can be insightful in many ways, but obviously learning what their perceived, strengths and weaknesses are of your product so that you can address those. And you making sure that the next conversation is going to clarify that and you're not going to be rehashing the same stuff. If it's a competitive deal and you know who you're up against, identify those key differences. Differentiation is always important. And in my experience, that has made the difference in many deals. It all comes down to price at the end. But if you can explain why this approach is better, you will see optimal results. And if you go this route, here's what's going to happen. It's a bit of, FOMO, or it's FUD, I guess. And that's a fair selling tactic. Make them a little uncomfortable, make them scared. Like, if I make the wrong decision, that's going to hurt.
100% agree. And again, that roller coaster analogy, just always think about that. Introduce the stakes, introduce the solution. And when talking about competition, if someone specifically kind of name checks that, I think it's perfectly fine to say, this is where we stack up against specific competitors, or just this is how we can suit and need. So don't be afraid to dive into that either. I typically don't name names, but I'll allow our customers kind of do that. But nevertheless, like it's always good to have that initial research of understanding who the key players are, who maybe we're even up against if we have that information, to then kind of specifically tailor the narrative towards that.
And one more thing I note is, if it feels like it went well, maybe float the idea of a conversation with the implementation team, or
Yeah.
what would happen beyond this deal. If you think things are likely moving forward, that's a great way to get their temperature, really. If they say, "Oh yeah, I'd love to talk to your onboarding team, get a sense for what that's going to take," that is often a strong buying signal. If they say, "Yeah, you know what, we'll schedule that later," might not be quite so encouraging. So try and keep the conversation moving.
We are running up to the end of our time. I wanted to go ahead and get one more audience question. Ryan had asked, how do you adjust your approach when supporting upgrades or expansions versus totally new deals? Wonder if I can.
I can see Matt's thinking, so I can start. First, understand where the account is currently. Talk to the CS team, the folks who are managing that relationship, and get a sense for what's going well, what's not going well. Where can we improve? If we're trying to drive for expansion, what is going to unlock that growth? If it's just fighting for renewal because they're a churn risk, why? Where have things not delivered the way that we had promised, so that we can address that head on? Um, don't just go in there assuming things are hunky dory. Understand what the current state is. All right, Matt, go.
No, that's almost exactly what I was thinking of saying as well. You have to understand the relationship. And quite frankly, too, I've been in those conversations where not that we weren't welcome, but that just it was a churn risk and they just needed a different set of hands to save the relationship versus hearing about what's new. So I think it's very important to understand those terms. And then just really understand like some of their critical win stories and how you can expand that success, right? For me, it's a little bit an easy story to say, hey, we primarily sell email marketing and we're going to rich push or mobile or SMS and understand those use cases. So of course, that'll be different for your business. However, kind of the upsell opportunity is laid out for you. But I think understanding that success and even repeating that back to them and seeing how, they currently measure success for partners is absolutely critical, of course, in a net new business scenario, but even for upselling different products too. And I mentioned the relationship of email and mobile, not to get specific, but there are just different criteria for success for getting someone to a mobile app versus getting them on a website versus making a purchase or have them go in store. So understanding that new medium, if that's a part of the upsell process, and understanding that those goals are vastly different from what you're doing currently now. But that's a really great question, and it definitely comes up a lot for us, especially in the world of AI as we're expanding to new products, new suites, new sets. Usually the question is, what do you do for AI? So you have to understand, why would AI be impactful for you? It's a great question to ask there.
Yeah, Ryan, I'd love to discuss that one in more detail. We don't have much time, but it's valid. I had thought about this as new deal stories for the most part. And I think it also depends on what you're selling, because how it's being used by what, teams will often impact the way you're going to present that. But there's a ton more to talk about than we have time left. So good question.
All right. And on that note, we are actually out of time. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. We hope you will join us again in November. We have a interactive demo coaching session with Rue Dickinson of Alpha Presales and our own CEO, Justin McDonald. As I said, we'll follow up today with a recording. You should get that tomorrow. There will be an exit survey as you leave. Please fill that out. We appreciate your feedback. Thank you again for joining us today. And Matt and Jason, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your expertise. We really appreciate it.
Thank you all so much. We really appreciate your time too for listening in.
Yeah, likewise. Hopefully we can do this again in the future.
Agreed.
That.